All right, could not be more excited to dive into fantasy basketball season. Of course, I am not nearly smart enough to carry this conversation, so thank God we have Canyon and Will here. Canyon and Will going to be making a ton of fantasy basketball content for us. Guys, introduce yourself. I could not be more excited to record this video with y'all.
Yeah, appreciate that. I'm Will. You know, we kind of have been doing basketball content, specifically doing a lot of player prop stuff, but we have been ingrained in fantasy basketball, love doing fantasy NBA, so we're excited to be doing this on the channel for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I'm Canyon, and I've been doing stuff on the side as well with Will prior to, joining up here with Mason. So yeah, I'm ready to roll, ready to get into this. NBA season is approaching.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right in. Let's just go into tier one. And I know, Will, you were wanting to talk a little bit about the league settings that we are going to be playing for, because obviously there's going to be different leagues, whether you're playing in a category format or a points format. This is mainly going to be for points, but Will, do you want to go through and just lay that out a bit?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously category format, points format. We'll be talking mostly about points. I prefer that, and that's kind of what I think is most common as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, point scoring, 1 point for a point. Rebound is 1.2. Assist is 1.5. Defensive stat, 3 points. And then a turnover is -1.
Awesome. Well, let's just dive right in. Give us our first guy this first tier.
Yeah, for sure. Kenny, do you want to lead it off? We've got a guy in a tier of his own.
Yeah, guy in tier of his own is Jokic. I think he's the consensus number one, back-to-back MVPs. You got Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. coming back this year. We've seen him be an MVP in fantasy and in regular season with them on the court, without them on the court. So you don't have to worry about them taking away usage. Jokic is still going to be a beast and put up numbers. They add Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. So all the times that we see Jokic at the high post, the top of the three-point line handling the ball, he's got cutters, he's got backdoor screeners, and now he's got one of the best corner three-point percentage guys in KCP to assist to. Jokic is one of the least injury-prone bigs in the league. That's what makes him so elite. Kind of just slows down the game, plays it at his own pace, his own methodical speed there, manipulates the defense, and he's going to get you so many points, rebounds. His floor for assist is so high. He'll get you a little bit of defensive stats too. So I think there's no doubt here Jokic is number one.
Definitely. Could not agree more. Yeah, we've got Jokic in his own tier. Totally agree with everything there. In the next tier, leading it off, we've got Giannis, who was second in points per game last season. Pretty similar as far as upside, points, scoring, rebounding. I think assists is probably the big difference between Giannis and Jokic as far as a floor there. But, Milwaukee's looking to run it back. Not a lot of significant changes. I don't think Ingles is a big enough change to expect anything different from Giannis and the Bucks this season. And yeah, I expect a lot of the same with Giannis. I'm not going to give him a massive bump from last season to put him up in the same tier with Jokic with, his improving free throw shooting. But it's Giannis, probably one of the best players in the NBA. Expect a lot of the same floor that we've seen from him.
Yeah, love Giannis. He could be up there with Jokic, right? But yeah, it's just that assist upside is not nearly as good as Jokic. So that kind of just keeps him right below. The points and rebounds are pretty comparable to Jokic, but yeah, he's fitting in there right there at 2. Number 3 in the tier with Giannis is Luka. Luka Magic does it all. He's going to get you points, rebounds, and assists. Very consistent in the last 3 seasons. He's been averaging around 29, 9, 10, give or take 1 point, rebound, or assist for the last 3 seasons. You get Brunson out of there. That's a lot of usage still for Luka here in the backcourt. You add Christian Wood, and we've kind of seen a little bit of what he would look like with a guy like Christian Wood because they had KP. But Porzingis was pretty timid down low scoring-wise. I think Christian Wood could be a little bit more aggressive as a lob threat, three-point shooter. So it's kind of just running it back with Luka here at the helm now with Brunson gone. Slot in Hardaway, but Luka's going to get so much usage and just so much work. He improved his three-point percentage game. His defense in the postseason and the tail end of last season was incredible. So Luka is definitely here in the same tier as Giannis.
So if we're looking at Luka and the projections that y'all have for his points per game, it does look a little bit lower what we had last year compared to Giannis. So are you expecting the bump up due to his age and the departure of Brunson?
Less so due to his age, but kind of more like, yeah, the departure of Brunson. I think the backcourt usage is going to be all him. Hardaway's there. Hardaway's a good scorer, but he's not as ball dominant as Brunson is. So I like Luka's points to be around the same that they have in the last 3 years. He improved his three-point percentage game, and you bring Christian Wood. He's not a super high usage offensive guy, but yeah, those are some of the reasons.
All right, well, let's go down to the third tier. Let's lead it off with a player that from a raw points per game perspective, I'd imagine that you probably have him up right maybe with Luka, but the issue is going to be the games played. Y'all want to talk about Joel Embiid, and of course, y'all know way more about fantasy basketball than I do. So how easy is it to go through and project a player to play less games overall? Because like from a football perspective, usually it's a lot of noise and a lot of randomness, but I know NBA's different just because of load management.
Yeah, definitely. And I even think to load management, we're kind of at a point where it doesn't impact as many players as it kind of did, a couple years ago when it was first kind of brought up and it was every single superstar was going through it. Specifically Embiid, through his career, not even just a load management thing, but he's been labeled as one of the most injury prone players for good reason. I mean, 51 games. The past 2 previous seasons, 68 this last season, actually the most he's played in his career. So it's tough. Predicting injuries is never a thing that you can really hang your hat on. But for NBA specifically, I think Embiid is one of those guys who is in this lower tier because of what we've seen from him in the injury proneness. So I'm anticipating, if I had to make a guess, Embiid, I would say he plays fewer games than all the guys we've already went through. But yeah, from an overall usage, scoring, fantasy perspective on a per game basis, I mean, he was 3rd last season. I expect him to be the same, even with another year with Harden. He still had massive usage with Harden and through the playoffs. And I actually think the addition of Harden might help Embiid as well. Just kind of gets to play a little bit of a different game. Harden gets some of that usage, but Embiid still maintains the fantasy upside, but not as much, banging down low that you see from Embiid and kind of what he's had to do to carry the load for the Sixers. So I actually think that the addition of Harden might help Embiid get closer to 60 plus games than the, 50, 55 we've seen from him.
Yeah, with Harden, when he's arrived in Philly, he played 21 games there. Embiid played every single game with him there. You've seen it before without Harden there. Embiid he is banging down low. He is sweating his butt off. He's carrying this team. And with Harden kind of stepping in, taking some of that usage away from Embiid, that downtick is very beneficial, I think, in the long term for Embiid. I don't think he'll play probably 70 games next season. It's kind of tough to ask for a guy just with that injury history. But I do think in the long run, it will benefit Embiid and the 76ers. So yeah, I think we're a little higher on Embiid and Harden because of that point too.
Definitely. Yeah, we've got Harden up here. I know a lot of people will look at, this ranking and him being in this tier and maybe raise an eyebrow just from what we saw when he went to the Sixers. Obviously, the scoring was the one big drop off from when he was with the Nets and what we've seen from him in his career. But I do think he shoots more. I think it felt kind of like a confidence, timidness thing. The assist numbers were still there. He's still going to be one of the highest rebounding guards. Defensive stats are kind of, whatever. He'll get you, a steal or two. But yeah, I anticipate he does shoot more this next upcoming season, getting a full off season with the Sixers and the team. And really, as far as the changes, I know we've got the emergence of Maxey and people think that might impact Harden, but Maxey still had high usage last season. I don't anticipate that skyrocketing or anything. And the changes they did make to the roster, bringing in Tucker, who's just going to be a 3-and-D guy. That honestly, in my opinion, helps Harden as far as just having a guy who's not going to take offensive usage outside of just sitting in the corner and taking a 3 or looking to pass the ball whenever he has it in his hands. So I do really like Harden. And even if he doesn't see the huge increase in shot attempts that we expect heading into the season, he just gives you such a nice floor with, almost for certain 10 assist upside through the season.
Yeah. These two guys, being on the same team and being in the top 5 for fantasy seems a little weird, but I think their relationship and kind of their nature of like how they play with each other, how they can spread the floor with each other, draw defenses for each other. I think it's kind of unique, and I still like them both up here. But LeBron next here in the same tier as Embiid and Harden. Another interesting one, obviously. The Lakers used 41 different starting lineups last season due to so many injuries and young player rotations coming in and out there. And so LeBron was tasked with a lot of the offense, a lot of the scoring. We saw, a very high production in his scoring, highest since 2006. I think that'll come down a lot if, Davis can be healthy, if Russ stays. There's a lot of questions still in Los Angeles there to see what they do with their lineup. So if they can stay healthy, I think LeBron's scoring will come down. His assists will kind of go back up to kind of the point guard that he's transitioning to be. But across the board, he's just going to fill out the stats. He's going to get mid-20s in points. He's going to get you rebounds, assists, defensive stats. So this is the kind of guy who's fantastic for a point system, but also for a category-based, system. I think he can produce in every single area. Obviously, one of the greatest players of all time, but Father Time hasn't slowed him down yet. So as we still like LeBron a lot here in this tier.
So I have a question not only with LeBron that y'all have here, but also maybe with the next ranking of KD. So how much could this potentially change as the offseason goes on? As you already mentioned, like maybe the Lakers aren't done making moves. Maybe they can actually pull off something like a Kyrie, like all the talking heads are talking about. And also with a Kevin Durant, how hard is it to rank these guys with some uncertainty with their situations? Or is it just at the end of the day, they're whatever situation they're placed in, they're elite level talents on their team and they're going to get the ball almost regardless?
Yeah, it's definitely tough. I'm happy I'm not in any drafts today, waiting for this news to come through for sure. But yeah, I mean, there's certain guys we've seen LeBron and even KD play with two superstars and still produce. So even though these definitely will change and adjust, and guys like Kyrie, KD, LeBron, and any superstars on the teams that any of those guys were to join or have joined them would see an impact in usage. I don't anticipate a huge drop off for guys like KD specifically. I know that's a big one just because it seems like he's almost certainly out of Brooklyn with the news and kind of the back and forth we've seen with the ownership there and KD. But yeah, I think it is scary because you talk about the teams he's listed in the Celtics and the Heat, and it was the Suns for a portion or the Blazers a little bit. A lot of those teams do have multiple superstars and definitely would impact him. But for me, I still expect KD specifically to still see high usage, and you're not going to mortgage your future to bring in a guy and not give him similar usage to what he's seen the past couple seasons. So while I would see a little bit of a drop versus where we would kind of project them if they were staying with the Nets and it was Kyrie and KD running it back, I wouldn't anticipate a huge drop off where they're moving down multiple tiers or anything.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me, I would have Durant move down a little bit depending on where he goes, just because I have him here because of his assist potential. You know, last year when Harden left, he was averaging 7.7 assists, highest of his career. Even with Kyrie there, Kyrie's never been a super large assist volume guy. So Kevin Durant kind of leading that team in the facilitative area as well as the scoring area. It kind of gave us a big bump there from what we could see out of Durant in another season in Brooklyn. But like we said, with everything that's been going on there, if he's not there, if he goes to the Heat, if he goes to the Celtics, these teams that already have, like set in stone facilitating point guards or wings even, I think the assist hit could be kind of big, which would move him down a little bit. But there's definitely a large asterisk next to Durant, right?
Well, awesome. Yeah, I feel like at least looking at your projections, like this tier is really close in terms of their raw points per game. Maybe you have Embiid a little bit higher, but the next tier dropping down to Tatum at 8, it does seem like there is a pretty big fall off in the raw points per game that you're expecting.
Yeah, definitely. Tatum is a guy I think a lot of people are going to have, some incorrect low opinions on from a fantasy perspective off of what we saw in the playoffs. But honestly, what we saw in the playoffs, I still like this spot for him with the upside he could bring just from an offensive usage guy. I mean, he's going to see a ton of shots. I know people are going to look at the addition of Brogdon and see that as, oh, here's another scorer. He's an upgraded Derek White. We're going to see shots taken away from Tatum. But this is still Tatum's team, even with the emergence of Jaylen Brown. I'm expecting similar usage to what we saw all through last season. And Tatum's one of those guys that's probably going to play, 60 plus games, what we've seen from him the past couple seasons. So I think he's one of those really high rising star floor superstars kind of at this stage. And I really like the usage, but you are right. I think from a pure scoring perspective, that's kind of why he isn't in that top tier. Just a lot more upside with those other guys, but I still think Tatum does have a nice floor and some upside, which kind of brings him into this tier.
Yeah, I think we have him at the top of this tier, and we might be higher than most people as well on Tatum. I don't think Brogdon will take too much offense away. I think he's there to kind of facilitate and fill in a void that Marcus Smart may have left on the offensive end sometimes. But, he shot his worst three-point percentage of his career last season, and he still managed to get 26.9 points per game. So I think that can easily increase if he can bring that three-point percentage up to what we've seen the last couple of years from him. And again, like Will said, he's the heartbeat of this team. He is going to have a lot of usage, a lot of shots up. His distribution, his assists might go down or maybe remain where they were at the start of last season. But I think there is a lot more scoring that can come out of Tatum.
Yeah, and then the next guy in this tier, we've got Ja Morant, who, obviously had a huge breakout season, huge jump from the year before. Only got to play 57 games last season dealing with the injury, but 27.4 points per game. I mean, that was massive. And we saw in the playoffs as well, huge assist potential and rebounding potential as well that we didn't really see through his first couple of years in the NBA. And I think he really, really can bring that. And if we could see him putting up similar assist and rebound numbers as some of these guys in the tier even above him, and with the crazy scoring upside for Memphis, which was one of the top 2 pace teams in the NBA, nothing should change there. They kind of are looking like they're, for the most part, running it back. And, it's going to be Ja's team. And you love Ja in a high-paced team with the way he plays. I like Ja a lot this season. I think he'll continue where he left off last year and in the playoffs as well.
Yeah, I think the big step for him to take now is facilitating, bring that assist up. So that's kind of what I project here that brings him up as far as a fantasy points per game person goes. I'd like the assist numbers to come up. I'd like the points numbers to actually come down a little bit. He shot insanely well from the field. 49.3% as a point guard is ridiculous. But he kind of plays like a center down low almost, even with how much he attacks the rim. But yeah, we're a little high on Morant as well. I just think he takes a jump distribution-wise. And, kind of floats around that 25, 26 points per game as well. But next up here in the same tier, we've got Kawhi. Kawhi is an interesting one coming off the ACL tear. He's had a lot of time to rest. They bring in John Wall, so he doesn't have to, not like he's, bringing the ball up the court too much. But he hasn't played a game since June of 2021. A lot of rest, no setbacks thus far, so he should be good to go to start the season or near the start of the season. And we've seen people recover from an ACL tear pretty well, like Spencer Dinwiddie in Washington posted up solid numbers after having an ACL injury. So I think he could be very productive in this year back. I think John Wall takes some pressure off of Leonard and Paul George, lets them kind of free up a little bit on the wings. And, we've seen Kawhi with Paul George post up great numbers. I think he can, again, be a 25-7-5 guy. Great defensive upside, of course, one of the greatest defensive players we have in the league right now. So whether he gets an uptick in usage or not, we've seen it before with Paul George. I don't think John Wall's going to be sucking up a lot of usage either. So I think we can see the return of Kawhi back to close to normal. And I think even close to normal brings him up here in this tier for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Another guy you have to kind of bring up as far as games played, and obviously returning from the injury as well. But there's been some positive reports too, and he's pretty far removed from the initial injury. So if you're talking about a guy who, there was even reports that he might return for the playoffs, that at the end of this season. So I think heading into this next year, I feel really good about where he's at and reports we've seen about his return. But yeah, I mean, he's one of those guys that's probably one of the hardest to rank, but I think he just deserves to be in this tier with, what he's shown the past 2 seasons and, the defensive stat upside too in this kind of format where you're getting 3 points per defensive stat is massive for a guy who can easily get you 2+ defensive stats any given night. Next guy, we've got Steph Curry, Finals MVP. This one was really interesting. I mean, you look at Steph's last season, played a decent amount of games without Clay. He had the injury as well at the end of the regular season last year. But it was pretty interesting. I mean, he had 25.5 points per game, and that was on one of the lowest 3-point shooting marks of his career. So I really anticipate that to have some positive regression there. And I think his scoring could maintain, if not increase, off of that. And it's still Steph's team, even with the return of Clay. But I do think the return of Clay does help the assist upside as well. And we got to see that in the playoffs as well. I mean, Steph will just one of those guys that can just give you a monster 35+ point night here and there and still have a lot of floor on top of that, with him being kind of the focal point of the Golden State offense, even if he's not a traditional point guard.
Yeah, the great thing about Steph is he's got that game that's just not going to age. He can play forever, right? The greatest shooter of all time. I do think his assist numbers, like you said, will go up with Clay being back for a full season. We've seen that difference in that stat last season already. And on top of that, Jordan Poole, Kuminga, Moses Moody, some really talented young guys that if they happen to share the floor with Curry, could prove to have some upside for Curry in assist-wise as well. But the last guy we've got here in this tier and to round out this top 12, it's an interesting one. It's Anthony Davis. And I know a lot of people maybe think he should be higher, he should be lower. It's up for debate a lot. This guy is probably the most injury-prone guy we've talked about. And we've had Kawhi Leonard and Joel Embiid on this list. So, he's coming off of, only playing max of 62 games in the last 4 seasons. It's just hard to believe that he can stay healthy. The nature of his play is very aggressive on both ends, offense and defense. But, when he is healthy, he's one of the statistically best bigs we have in the league across the board. It's just a matter of a classic high-risk, high-reward player who will probably need to see the most games he's had in a single season in the last 5 years to be a top 10 player. But he's had a lot of rest. LeBron is probably wanting him to get back sooner than later for his legacy's sake. Who knows if he'll even be in LA, but there's no denying that this guy is one of the most talented bigs we've had in the league for so long. Defensive player of the year as well. So fantasy-wise, he's an absolute monster, but health-wise, he's a little fragile.
Definitely, yeah. Anthony Day-to-Day Davis was a tough guy to rank for sure, but I want to put some respect on him after making that joke. I mean, he was 8th in points per game last season, and that was playing through injury. I mean, a lot of those games were questionable tags heading into that he was definitely playing through injuries. And yeah, I mean, you talk about defensive stat upside. We mentioned it with Kawhi Leonard. It's hard to argue anyone kind of in the top 20 or 30 has as much defensive stat upside as Anthony Davis. Just a monster. And yeah, on a per game basis, I mean, he's a top 8, maybe even a top 6 guy. But yeah, I mean, with the injury concerns, while you could argue some of them were unlucky, guys landing on his ankle and whatnot, it's just been too consistent of, missing significant games through just the recent parts of his career for him not to be labeled as injury prone and be at the bottom of this tier.
Yeah, well, technically there's one other guy in the tier. Looks like we're not going to get to him. Looks like he will be at 13, but maybe we can talk about him in the next video. But again, guys, thank you for coming on. I cannot wait to continue to record with y'all and to continue to see what y'all are able to put out on this channel. I'm sure a lot of other people are going to be excited. So if you have not done so already, of course, you know what I'm going to say. Go down there, drop that like, subscribe to the channel, because I promise you Will and Canyon are going to be bringing y'all a ton of great content coming soon. But I think that's all I got. Do y'all have anything, guys?
No, appreciate it. Looking forward to the NBA season as it's coming up and gearing up for some fantasy stuff, player pop stuff. Love the NBA. Super excited. Appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to it.
Yes, sir.